Go for it.
Yeah.
Who are you? Who are you with?
Steve Knotts, I'm chair of the Fairfax GOP.
Christine Brim, FCRC.
Jana Sachs, FCRC.
Jeff Shapiro, FCRC liaison to the board.
All right.
Tyrone Allen,
Still.
voter equipment manager, Fairfax County. I'm Steve Arch, I'm a Fairfax resident.
Blanca Snega, HR manager at Office of Election.
Okay.
I'm Christopher Hensel, I'm here as a private citizen for tonight.
Monique Anderson, Concerned Citizens.
Abigail Peters, staff.
Robbie Dashi, Office of Election Staff.
Elena Selnick Escobar, Office of Elections.
Ellen Tchaikovsky, Assistant Registrar for Early Voting Satellites.
Pat Ferguson, Special Assistant, Office of Elections.
Beth Fessel, clerk to the Electoral Board.
Who are you?
Scott Konopasek, Director of Elections, General Registrar.
I am Steve Hunt, Chairman, and with me is the Vice Chairman, Tina Lawton, and Secretary, the Honorable Kate Hanley.
I'll move the adoption of the agenda, Mr. Chairman.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
The agenda is adopted as published.
I'll move the adoption of the minutes of October 21st and November 3rd.
I'll second that.
Comments, concerns? All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Unanimously.
I'll move the adoption, the appointment of the election officers in front of us. There's a total of 57, 21 Democrats, 22 Republicans, and 14 independents. And I didn't check that adding. I hope it adds up. It does. So I'll move their adoption.
I'll second.
Appointment.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. List is appointed as published. General Registrar's report.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight's report's a little bit shorter than some of the previous ones. Start out as usual with voter registration statistics. We've done our data cleanup after the election, making all the updates. And our registration is going back up. We have 740,000 active voters and a total of almost 780,000 total voters, including inactives. A new statistic that we'll start reporting is permanent absentee voters. This is a new set of people who have submitted a permanent absentee ballot request, which means they will receive a ballot automatically for every election. It supersedes the annual ballot request that some of you may be familiar with. We are right now at 50,000, over 50,000 folks who will automatically be sent a ballot if we were having an election like this. Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act requires certain jurisdictions to provide voting materials and voting information in designated languages. Since 2010, 11, we've been required to provide information in Spanish and later in Vietnamese. By board choice, we also provide voter information in Korean. After each census, the Department of Justice reapplies their calculations and designates languages for jurisdictions. We had no change. We still have federally mandated the requirement to provide information in Spanish and Vietnamese, and I presume the board will continue with this policy, also providing information in Korean. So no change to our language requirements. Notably, a number of our surrounding localities picked up language requirements, picked up Spanish. We've already been working with several of them, giving them advice and information on how we implement it. Redistricting, big topic. The Board of Supervisors adopted new boundaries for supervisorial districts on December 7th. They largely drew the lines maintaining precinct integrity of all of our precincts, with the exception of one. The one precinct is Woodburn. Woodburn will be required to be split in half, with the portion west of 495 being in one supervisorial district and the portion east of 495 in and of it. We anticipate when the state releases its final official boundaries, that there will be more precinct changes that will have to be made to conform to those boundaries. I'll remind everyone that the law changed. It said that we can no longer have split precincts. So we will have to adjust precinct lines. And it's possible, and I fully anticipate that we'll need to add additional precincts due to growth and also due to the geometry where the lines actually fall. We will be saving all of the changes that need to be made until all of them have been determined, and we'll make all the changes at the same time. We have multiple changes to apply to different systems. Everyone obviously thinks of the maps. We need to change the maps, and that's the easiest change to make, the easiest update. We also need to update Veris with every street address, making sure it's in the correct precinct. We have to update all of our other supporting election management systems like poll chief, poll pad, and electionware to make sure that also reflects the precinct changes.
Just a reminder, you have to do a close check between the GIS capture and the real world.
Right, absolutely.
Because we have found that they don't match up.
Absolutely. I've gone through this process many, many times. I'm familiar with where the pitfalls are. I expect us to have a clean transition and with 100% accuracy. That's our goal. On the personnel side, Bushra Ardalan, who's been acting voter registration supervisor, was hired into permanent status in that position in November, and we have an accepted offer for a new fiscal manager that will be starting in January, along with our new IT manager, who will be starting on January 10th. So actually, both the fiscal manager and IT manager will start on January 10th. We're excited to have new folks on board. We have a lot of vacancies on the staff to fill and some reorganization in the business of the office to take care of. Freedom of Information Act requests this year has been notable based upon the volume of FOIA requests that we've been receiving. From August to Election Day, we received 64 requests. From November 2nd until last week, we received an additional 32 requests after the election. And of note, 48 of those requests were made by the same person. It's a lot of work. It's taken essentially one full-time employee continuously since August to respond to this, but this is part of our job. This is part of transparency. This is part of making information available. So although we whine and complain, and it sometimes distracts us from our mission critical tasks, we understand that it's part of what we need to do. After each election, the staff and I get together for an all-day meeting to discuss the previous election. We call it a post-election review. We met for a full day on December 6th and discussed what went well, what we'd like to do differently, and the staff has put together a post-election report to share with everyone tonight. Once the presentation has been made, copies will be of the presentation will be added to the record of this meeting, and we'll also post them on the website tomorrow. So with that, that concludes my report. I think the next item is for the staff to do theirs.
Any question on the short writing report? Let's move on to the next post-election report.
Looks like it's showing up. Terrific. All right, so good evening, everyone. So my name is Robbie Udashki. I work here in the Office of Elections. So on behalf of our office staff, some of my colleagues and I are going to present some information about the post-election review and report process. So I'll be joined shortly by Helen Tchaikovsky, our Assistant Registrar for Voting Satellites, and Tyrone Allen, our Voter Equipment Manager. So we're going to go through 3 sections. We're going to go through the election by the numbers. I'm going to take you through that. Helen's going to take you through the successful initiatives for this past election, and Tyrone's going to discuss some of the future initiatives that we have planned and under consideration for next year ahead. All right, so let's start off by taking a look at the various numbers for this election. So for this calendar year, 2021, from January 1st through December 1st, we've processed more than 300,000 voter records. That's our voter registration team, as Scott said, now led by Busher Ardelon in a permanent position. That includes various different actions taken. Every action obviously takes time to process for our office staff. And so these actions throughout the course of the year will allow us then to conduct a successful election. In terms of this specific election, so we have over 700,000 voters that are active registered voters at this time. And of those, 442,000 voted in this past election, which represents 60.2% overall turnout. Of those 442,000 voters, you can see that about 265,000 voted on election day, 110,000 voted early in person at one of our 16 satellite locations. About 65,000 chose to vote by mail for election day. And we also had about 1,500 mail ballots that had to be hand counted, about 1,500 provisional ballots. And what you can see is that 40% of the votes cast in this election were actually cast before election day, which is a trend that has obviously been increasing over the past couple of years, especially with the change in legislation last year. So as you can see right here, 40% is the combination of the early voting in person at the satellite locations, as well as the vote by mail operation. In terms of our early voting satellites, so we have 16 total locations that are ultimately open for the election, but of those, 3 are open for the first 35 days of the early voting period. The 45-day early voting period began on September 17th, 2021, and during those first 35 days, you can see that of the 3 locations that we have open, about half of the voters who voted during that time voted here in this building at the Fairfax County Government Center. About 25% voted at the Mount Vernon Governmental Center, and about a quarter voted at the North County Governmental Center. Of these 3 locations, this number of votes combined, it added up to about 27,000 votes, which was about a quarter of the overall in-person early votes. Once all the locations opened up on October 21st, we had a little over 83,000 voters that chose to vote during that final 10-day early voting period. And of those, you can see they voted at the different 16 locations. The location here, the Fairfax County Government Center, is of course our largest, representing 12% of the overall votes cast during that period. You'll also note that the West Springfield Government Center and the McLean Government Center had 9% of the turnout. They are the 2 other next largest locations after this one here. And in total, this number of votes over those 10 days represented 76% of the in-person early votes cast. As I mentioned, the legislation that was passed last year allowed for no excuse absentee voting, which has led to a marked increase in the number of people who choose to vote early before election day. 4 years ago, in the comparable gubernatorial election, we had about 30,000 people that chose to vote in person before election day, with a valid reason, of course. That escalated heavily this election to almost 110,000 people, almost quadrupling in total. So there's been a marked increase, which has obviously led to increased staff responsibilities and challenges in processing that number of voters.
Robbie, those numbers just the people who walk in to vote absentee in person?
That's correct. So those numbers, right, that was just for in-person absentee.
So if you add the by mail absentees, those numbers go even higher?
That is correct, which I'm about to cover in just a second here.
Okay, sorry.
So for our vote by mail operation, we had about 82,000 people in this past election that voted, that requested a mailed absentee ballot. Of those 82,000 people, 66,000 returned their absentee ballot by mail, and it was accepted. So that's an 81% successful return rate. We also had some ballots that were returned and rejected or void because perhaps there was no ballot inside the envelope, there were 2 ballots if 2 people returned them together, or various other reasons for which we were unable to initially accept those ballots. The law also now allows for a curing process for mailed absentee ballots if there was something that was insufficient or missing on the ballot envelope. So in this particular election, we had about 1,500 ballot envelopes, that required curing. And of those, 811 or 55% were successfully cured. We contacted the voter in all these situations, invited them to provide the information that was missing or insufficient, and fortunately more than half of them were able to do so in time for the ballot to be counted for this election.
Robbie,
Yes.
I think he corrected his ballots to envelopes because it needs to be crystal clear that we don't see the ballots inside those envelopes. It's just the envelopes we're working with, so if we opened them, we'd know how you vote, so we don't.
Thank you. Yes, it's only for omissions on the envelope itself. And you can see, I'll go back a slide for a moment. Right, it's for reasons like a missing signature, a missing name, or a missing address, or combinations thereof. So just like the growth in in-person early voting, we've also seen a marked increase in the vote-by-mail operation, again, because of changes in the law that allow any voter now, without an excuse, to be able to vote before Election Day. So 4 years ago, again, the gubernatorial election, about 15,500 voters voted by mail. This time that went up to more than 82,000. So that's more than a five-fold increase. When we look at some other aspects of the office, so our rovers are individuals who support our election officers in our precincts on Election Day. Our rover team increased by 5 individuals this election, which allowed us to decrease the number of polling places assigned to each rover. So we went down to an average of 10 polling places per rover, which meant that they were able to provide better on-site support to each of their locations by having fewer precincts on each of their routes. We also programmed and tested more than 1,000 pieces of voting equipment, and we tested tens of thousands of ballots on that voting equipment. In terms of election officers, that's what my team and I take care of on Election Day. We had about 2,100 election officers that served on Election Day, right around the target we aimed for this election. We had about half of the officers on Election Day that represented the Democratic Party, 35% that represented the Republican Party, and 15% that represented 12% party that were unaffiliated. Excuse me. The Code of Virginia asked us to try and assign an equal number of Democrats and Republicans, and that's what we did. We assigned every single available and trained Republican officer that we had to us, and we made sure to make proactive contact with every individual to try and get as many Republican officers as possible for this election. About 10% of our officers, 267, were also serving for the first time in this election. We also had nearly 300 individuals who canceled in the 4 weeks before Election Day, for whom we had to replace. Fortunately, we had plenty of people that we could use to replace them because we had about 3,000 people that took the training and were eligible to serve in this past election. In addition to the 2,100 election officers, we also had 170 high school student pages that served across the county on Election Day to support the teams of election officers. Finally, if we look at our Election Day voter service, not only are we providing support at all the polling places on Election Day, but of course any voters or members of the public that call us here at the office, we want to help them and answer their questions. We had more than 4,000 phone calls on Election Day that various parts of our office responded to and took care of. And we also had, in terms of our website, we had over 50,000 people visit our website, representing more than 75,000 page views. So we're able to provide information in that way as well. Finally, if we look at our provisional ballots, so we had about 2,600 provisional ballots in this election. Of those, 64%, or about 1,700, were able to be successfully accepted by the Electoral Board. And the vast majority of those, more than 90%, were because the individual had requested a mailed absentee ballot before Election Day, but then showed up to their precinct on Election Day to vote in person without bringing their absentee ballot with them. If they do bring their absentee ballot with them, then of course they could have just surrendered it and voted normally in person. And for the individuals who cast a provisional ballot that was not able to be counted, for the most part it was split between 3 reasons. It was mostly because they either were not registered in Virginia or they were not registered in the precinct in which they went to try and vote, often because they were registered in a different jurisdiction entirely, different county. So with that takes us through the various numbers for this election. I'm going to turn it over to Helen Tchaikovsky to take you through some successful initiatives for this election.
Thank you, Robbie. I'm very excited. We had a lot of interesting initiatives and successful initiatives for this election. First of all, our guiding principles were security, accuracy, and transparency, and we really made sure that everything that we were doing We were following these principles, and these principles were always foremost in our thoughts, and certainly in training, that's what we stressed. So all of our workers made sure that that was what was important. I think one of the biggest initiatives was the fact that, as you all know, in absentee voting, the results usually come in a large chunk, and you can divide it by congressional districts. There is interest to really get down and find out better data, how people vote by precinct. So we figured out, we worked in the initiative that we printed out 249 different ballot styles, and we used express vote at the locations to help. People were able to select their ballot style, and people were able to vote smoothly, getting their ballot style. And as a result, we were only one of 5 jurisdictions in the state that reported all the results by precincts. Also, with the law change, people were encouraged to do Sunday voting. We implemented Sunday voting at all of our 16 locations. I have to say, I thought we wouldn't have a lot of demand, but we had lines at our Sunday voting, and we processed 44,656 voters, or 4.2%. And we got feedback that people appreciated having Sunday voting. We also transitioned from laptops to poll pads at the early voting satellites. We used to use laptops with Verus. That made it a little complicated, and that many times people would forget their password and their two-step authentication. This also moves the process closer to being similar to a precinct where they use poll pads. It helps check in voters more quickly, and also we can monitor the information in real time. On ePulse, which is a system we could see who was voting where, what time, what machines were on, what machines were down. For the precincts, the poll pads were used at the precincts. What they did is, rather than having an iSync, they could download the database onto the poll pads 2 days before the election. So this eliminated preparing the flash drives, and on election day they were up and ready to go first thing in the morning. Ballot mailer. This was also a huge change. We contracted with a third-party ballot mailer, and they were able to process all the vote-by-mail ballots and mail them out. If any of you were here in last November, we had over 250 people sticking labels, and we had many, many rooms where we just had labelers. This eliminated that need. It was more efficient, more cost-effective, less errors, and it was a huge initiative. On election night, we imported the results using the USB flash drives from the DS200s. This replaced the phone. We did the phone-in results, but it really is to replace it. It was a lot quicker and more efficient and less errors. And those were our initiatives. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tyrone to talk about, we have more initiatives in mind.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Tyrone Allen, Voter Equipment Manager, Office of Elections. And I want to talk to you about some of the future initiatives that we have planned coming down the pike to make things a lot more secure, a lot more accurate, and a lot more transparent. These are just a few that we have noted. We're planning to have new iPads that are cellular capable, which will give us real-time information and allow us to have a more accurate look at the voter and the votes as they are, as we put those together at the end of the day. We're also going to have the improved locations. We're going to take a look at where the voters are voting, and to make things more accessible, a lot more easy for them to get in and out of. Some of the facilities are not the best, and we want the best for our voters here in Fairfax County. We're also exploring ballot on demand. We used the express votes in the satellites this time, and it was a huge success. But because we have ballots printed by precinct at this particular time, that's 249 different precinct styles. some type of ballot on demand. We're looking at it for future use to make it a lot more easy for the voter. We also had a new depot in North County. This time it was a huge success. This allowed the precincts to turn in their materials at the end of the night without the big lines here trying to get equipment back in. We want to expand on this concept by providing another depot. If we can get them down to about 50 each, it would reduce the amount of time and the amount of confusion, be able to get things back more quickly and put it in to our evening, and better control over our inventory. Eliminate the hand counts. These, some ballots come marked incorrectly, they get torn, they get worn, the machines won't read them. But being able to transpose them onto a ballot that's readable makes it a lot more transparent, but it also makes it a lot more accurate in the counting, so that every voter that cast a vote will be realized. And to continue to improve our canvass process, which is the next day after the election, where we verify our results. The accuracy, the security, the transparency, we are really trying to make things available to the public so that they can see how well the county operates when it comes to accepting their vote and doing an accurate count. Thank you.
Questions?
I've got
a few. How did we test the EVs?
How do we test the EVs? We had scripts for ballots for the different ballot types that were voted on the machine. A card was printed, and then it was scanned into a DS200 and verified. Did I get that
That is
right?
correct.
Script is in, a person was told, punch these buttons?
Right, right.
Okay, not like a script that was run, did electronically?
No, it was
What
not
is
an electronic script. It was directions, instructions
Okay.
to the person.
And then made sure that
Right.
everything worked. Some of these are things that people have been asking me, and you're all here, so I can ask you now. Were there 0 tapes run at the satellites when the DS200s were first turned on?
Yes, they were.
Okay, were they a part of the Canvas
Yes.
documentation?
Yes.
Okay. And this is just something that I think needs to be done, that there are certain things in the code that specify the need for a tape as opposed to a report. You may want to make sure that you are in compliance with the code when you don't run tapes at the satellites.
Right. So,
Because there's,
a tape is a term for a printed report, and it's
doesn't
not
matter,
unique.
I'm not
Right.
talking about technology, I'm not talking about, but the code says that if the machine is capable of making a tape, this is what you do with the tapes.
So,
Which may or may not mean you actually are supposed to run a tape from the machine.
So just to clarify, all the DS200s in use on election day had
I'm
tapes
talking
run.
about satellites.
And we do not have the capability of running a tape from the DS850.
Well, that's why it says if. But just that there's been some concern expressed that, and it gets into the interpretation of the code, which I know is a very gray area, but something to check on. And now that the lawsuit's over, I had this question about the last 4 digits of the Social Security number on the absentee ballot application, and how you, because you specified that the reason you didn't need it was because you said that you could confirm that particular application was from a particular person.
Correct.
I would like to know how you could do that with 60,000? I don't know how many didn't have this last four, but you had, but how were you able to do that?
First of all, the only applications in question were those submitted on paper. The electronic applications forced the last four, so it was not an issue there. It was on the pre-filled out third-party applications that were sent out to voters that they filled in some of their information, some of it was pre-populated, and sent it in. So each one of those forms was processed manually. If the name matched and the voter was in the file with that name, and if the address provided by the voter on the application matched the address that we had on file where the voter was registered, and if comparing the signature we had on file to the signature on the application, if it matched, we had 100% confidence that we had the identity of that voter established.
Where did you have signatures on file? Because I know we've gone all digital and gotten rid of all of our paper applications.
We have them, they're all scanned documents in Veris. We have a signature, at least one signature, on file electronically for every voter.
And the people who have filed electronically,
we have their DMV signature,
which is the rather interesting looking signature that you get from the electronic signature.
which are remarkably resemble the signature, the actual signature of the voter.
What kind of training occurred so that people were capable of matching signatures?
First of all, we started with the presumption that the signature was a match and that we weren't trying to establish beyond a reasonable doubt that someone forged this. We started with the assumption that it is the voter. When you start from that assumption and you put the two signatures side by side, it's obvious if they're the same. You don't have to look at every letter. I have experience in personally verifying over millions of signatures.
Did you verify these signatures?
I taught the staff how to do it, and when they had questions, they brought it to me to resolve.
Were any of them rejected?
Yes, there are a number of them that the address didn't match exactly, the name didn't match exactly.
No, signature, just the
and the
signature.
I don't.
Whether the signature caused a rejection.
I can find out. I'm sure that there were. It had to be a perfect match.
The voter's name and address is public information. And so confirmation of a voter name and address really is no confirmation at all, because if somebody's gonna fake it, they're not gonna fake it with the wrong name and address unless you're ignorant.
Okay.
So, you're coming down to signature identification.
That is correct, but I will also point out that when they did provide the last four, it was not verified. If the other components that I mentioned matched, we did not have to go to the last four to determine the identity of the voter. And we did not.
So you're saying you didn't check the last four?
Correct.
How would you
If we already have determined it's the voter, the address, and the signature, we don't also check, there's no need to also check the last four. We often did, just to verify things.
I would do things differently. Since there's a requirement for the last four, there's a purpose for them to be there, to ensure, that
The presumption is that the last four is there, as written in the code and in the GR handbook, that it's to be used to determine the identity of the voter. There's also a specific section in the code that says that we cannot reject an application solely for missing the last four if we.
That's not what it says. What it
Yes,
says is, unless it is something that is material, and then it becomes a conversation as to whether the last four is material or not.
Right.
which is getting into
Another-
the
right.
legal side of things.
Right. So there's
But
two,
somebody has
there's
to make a
sec-
call, so the
there's
actual
two
thing is
sections of code.
whether or not it is material.
Right. There's
And-
two sections of code. One says that the last four is material, the other says it may not be. We can't do both. You have to pick one.
I understand.
And the one we pick is, if we're confident in the
Well-
identity of the voter, we'll give the benefit of the doubt to the voter. And I will point out that this is only an application. This is not the ballot. This does not
Yeah,
determine.
but you don't get the ballot without the application.
Correct. All it does
This
is issue
one
them,
of our-
all
this
it,
is
all
one
it
of our
does is send them a
security
ballot.
gateways associated with the absentee ballot process.
Right, it's just a request
But
for a
it is
ballot.
one of the security gateways to the absentee ballot process, that you ensure that that request is actually coming from the voter.
Right, and we satisfied that requirement.
Okay. Just want to make sure that discussion was out there.
That's
and
fair.
People understood. And we've discussed this. I have a different opinion. I'm not the registrar. I'd like to do is go to electoral board reports, and then if folks have questions for the registrar, we can address those in the public comment.
Oh, yes. He's not surprised. I just want to make some observations to follow up all the numbers you saw and some of the things that we've heard since the election in sitting in with Rover's meetings and talking to voters and all those kinds of things. And first, I want to say to all of the folks that are listening and all of the staff in the room who worked on early voting or on election day, who worked answering questions, all the people, the registered voters that sent absentee ballots, I want to thank all of you, and including all the observers, for their commitment and dedication to the voters of Fairfax for an accessible, efficient, secure, successful election in 2021. But I'd like to spend a little time now looking forward to 2022 as some of the things that we learned this year that we need to be thinking about for next year, because it's still a time of great change. And one we've talked a bunch about, so I won't spend much time on that, and that's the early in-person voting at satellites. And as Helen mentioned, or whoever mentioned it, the 45 days out opening of the 3 sites was extremely successful. It relieved the lines here. It also relieved some here because we had vaccinations going. Let's remember the context in which we have to do this, which keeps changing. The Board of Supervisors, so you know, has asked us to be more clear about our advertising of which hours are open when and where, and of course we'll look at that again. We look at that every year to see if we can do it a better and clearer way, and we'll look at it again. Our satellite workers indicated that it's so popular that they were stretched pretty thin, and so we need to look at our staffing. And curbside voting, of course, voting in person is very popular. So is curbside voting. It continues to be very busy, and I would want us, because that takes away from time from the workers inside, to look at our staffing, and I think that was mentioned. We need to review our staffing levels and maybe shifts, different kinds of shifts, to maximize efficiency in targeted places. And I would like, other jurisdictions do this, I would like for us to think about a curbside satellite to see how that works. There's several jurisdictions that do it. I sort of think it feels like driving through McDonald's, but nonetheless, let's see, look at how they do that. This year, I had somebody ask me the other day, Kate, are you still working to be able to access satellite the voting machines and start counting them from the satellites before 7 o'clock on election day? Because that's what happened in 2020. You couldn't open them till 7 o'clock. And it took us forever, as you might recall, or until midnight, whichever, it seemed like forever. But that's been solved. The legislation passed, but I think we need to keep a careful eye on that to be sure that we're starting on that, to be sure so that we can report and report accurately. We need to review that process. And one of the things that we noticed up there, our chiefs reported that on election day, we had more out of precinct voters than usual, and that showed up in provisionals, particularly at places like Monument, which votes here on election day, because people saw everybody voting here, all those people that you saw in the statistics voting here during satellite hours, and they thought they could come and vote here on election day. So that's gonna be one of those things that we need to be sure that people understand. Precinct lines don't mean as much to people as they used to, that neighborhoods change and all that kind of thing, and we're gonna change a lot of precinct lines. So we need to be looking to be sure we explain in a better way that on election day, you need to vote in your precinct. Those of us that have been, well, I've been voting early for a long time, but we need to be sure that we're clear with that. And that leads me to my next issue, and one we always have on the burner, and now I think it's time that we've made all these other strides that we start working on it, particularly is media and community outreach. If we start now and think about that, I think we'll be able to plan and execute a program that includes the County Office of Public Affairs and includes us in a messaging from the office that follows the time when you should know it. It doesn't help you to tell us that you need to, that early voting when we're telling you that in August. We need to, or that it's too late. We tell you that you had to get your ballot in, but it's too late. We need to be sure, and we haven't done that, but we need to be sure that we're saying the right things at the right times and to meet people where they're getting their information. So we need to worry about that, particularly with specific dates. Additionally, redistricting next year is going to require us to be incredibly proactive about community input, and I'll talk about that a little bit because there are going to be a lot of changes as to where people vote. Chief, Assistant Chief, and Election Officer training. In the past years before COVID, in the before times, we could have election officers and chiefs and assistant chiefs come in for what I call the lab. I'm old enough to know that when I went to college, I had the lecture and the lab, and so we could do the training on Zoom and various ways like that, and then we'd have a lab at times where people could come in and use the machines. We weren't able to do that this year, and that was a really good self-selecting thing for people that were not comfortable or maybe didn't remember or knew, and I think we should go back to that. Additionally, I think we should go back to the calling in the Zooms that we had in 2020, where people could self-select and call in an additional. We had, I guess, 3 of them, Robbie, was a huge participation, because people that are newer, people that didn't do it last year, but now they have to remember, they feel a lot more comfortable knowing that they had a little chance to brush up on their skills, and that makes for a better election day. And with the changes that are coming for all of us, we'll need to increase our training. And finally, facilities, and I want to talk a little bit about those, because Beth and I get to go out and look at a lot of facilities. Again, because of COVID and the fact that Election Day is now a holiday in Virginia, we didn't meet with the school staff and school security as we have in the past because it's a holiday. Nobody's going to be there. This won't be a problem. We'll need to do that again next year. We'll also need to address the very few but very important concerns that we've heard from the chiefs and the rovers about specific facilities where parking was difficult, or the rooms were not appropriate, or the school where the band decided to practice in the parking lot at 8 in the morning. Those kinds of things, we need to be alert to that. Our assumption was that the holiday would obviate the need to do more communication, and that was not entirely borne out. And we are going to have to up that because we're going to have a lot of new precincts and a lot of new polling places next year. Most of them went beautifully, but we know that there's a challenge there. Well, finally, I would say that communicating with our facilities will be especially important because of the Congressional, State Senate, and House of Delegates redistricting, and that's gonna necessitate a number of new or different precincts depending on where the lines go. Particularly now that the law does not allow split precincts, as I believe Robbie mentioned. As well, we have several large precincts that will need to be split. So almost everybody in the county is gonna have a change in some way. They'll be in a different district, they'll be in a different magisterial district, they'll be a different precinct. And so we're going to have to plan for and budget for, I hesitate to say, a mailing probably to everybody in the county. We mail to everybody in the county now, but we're gonna, with the folder information that you get in October, but we're probably gonna have to do an official mailing as well to have people be comfortable about, they know with all this change, they know where they're going. And so those are the kinds of things that came to my attention after Election Day, but it was an incredibly successful Election Day. And lots of people voted, lots more people voted in this election than ever voted this year. And I want to thank everybody for all the efforts and assure everybody listening that we learned stuff too. And now we're going to start right now working on that kind of thing, because you got to start early. November comes very quickly with June in the middle, and we don't yet know exactly who's going to be voting where for whom. That's my report.
Great. This quite possibly being my last meeting on the electoral board, I have a few remarks, things that I would like to say. So it has been an honor and a privilege to serve on this electoral board the last 8 years. And with 2 years of Rover, that's 10 years, getting some very small amount of money from the Fairfax County system here. I've been blessed to work with some very special people, and then Kate.
Well, I'm going to tear up this.
Everybody knows Kate.
That's worse than what you said earlier.
Throughout the county, you go anywhere, any meeting, any place, everybody knows Kate. We rely on many hard-working people to run the elections here in Fairfax County. It was always interesting to talk to electoral board members in other districts where they have 1 or 2 precincts, and they talk about doing their training the weekend before for the 3 people that go beyond the folks that are there. They live in a totally different world. Here in Fairfax County, it is a major logistical enterprise that we get to do 2 to 3 times a year. And while the process is not perfect, and there are always ways to improve, the frequency with which this office performs elections while maintaining Kate Hanley's primary metric of staying off the front page of the Washington Post is very impressive. I think in the future, you just need to keep the GR from promising that all returns will be in by 8. The Lord has blessed me with a number of experiences that really prepared me for this position. It's always interesting when you look back on the things that you've done and see how well it's prepared you for where you are now. I had engineering and a technical background, a military mission-focused background. I had experience in the political spectrum from poll watcher to precinct chair to candidate to elected office or elected official. I was even an election officer and a rover. And it really gave me a perspective that allowed me to see the impact the election process would have on most of the people involved. And I hope that I use that perspective to improve the process and to serve the voters of Fairfax County well. Since joining the board, we've greatly improved our equipment. Something that was near and dear to my heart was the communication and the coordination with election officers, which I think we have done significantly better. I believe the election operations that are actually under our control and not driven by Richmond are greatly improved. And I would like to think that in some small way that I may have contributed to those improvements. Now, while the office is predominantly focused on the election, the process and the logistics, we need to never forget how important the electoral process is to our form of government. faith in the electoral process is what has allowed us to peacefully transfer power for 233 years, with a slight exception in the 1860s, where we had a bit of an issue. If we as a people lose faith in the fair and honest elections, our representative democracy is at risk. For if people don't believe the election was fair and honest, they will question the output and may refuse to allow the peaceful transfer of power. Now, for those of you who may have had the January 6th riot jump to your head, I would like to suggest that you also think back 4 years to the resistance movement that formed by those who were in denial of the 2016 election results. It cuts both ways. That's why the transparency created by the many observers in the last year is so beneficial and worth the inconvenience. That transparency revealed how complex the elections are here in Fairfax County. It revealed the security processes that were in place. It motivated some additional security that was added as a result of the discussion with the observers. It did reveal some weak points, some mistakes, and areas that need improvements, but those will only enable us to get better. It's annoying to pay the penalty for someone else's errors and wrongdoing, especially for those who would never intentionally do anything illegal. But I believe this will greatly improve Fairfax County's ultimate reputation. The right to vote in this country is precious. It's precious because it is so rare in the world. For those of us who have been in the military and have been able to travel around the world and see how the many other places in this world is run, this is a unique place. There are just not that many places where citizens get to choose their local, state, and federal leaders. That and the accountability that goes along with that is one of the things that has made this country the place to which people from around the world want to come. My vote is precious, additionally, because so many people have paid the ultimate sacrifice to defend and protect it. I have friends and colleagues who launched off and never came. This didn't happen when I practiced.
Well,
Launched off and
should
never
practice.
came home to their families to ensure our continued right to vote. The spilt blood of patriots give a value to my vote and your vote that should never be forgotten. And sadly, my vote is disenfranchised every time there is voter fraud. The sacrifice of those who died to protect the right to vote is tainted whenever we see voter fraud. Voter fraud, like the thousands of voters registered both in Maryland and Virginia that we identified through information matching names and birthdays between Fairfax County and Maryland. Voter fraud like those who identified to the clerk of court that they were not U.S. citizens, but they were on our voter rolls. Fraud like the young man I observed when I was a rover, who had brought a van full of people from a group home who were expecting him to tell them how to vote. But he was unable to do that, even though they begged him, because he knew I was watching him, and he knew that that was not allowed. And yes, tainted by questionable practices like a candidate who didn't live in his district, and his campaign abused the absentee ballot system to keep me off the Virginia Senate. And my fear is that it's just the tip of the iceberg. As long as there are elections, there will be those who will do anything to win, even cheat. And that's why there are security practices in place. I heard our General Registrar explain to a group that there's no single process that makes an election safe. but it's a layering of many processes that result in an overall security of an election. And I believe that the systematic removal of some of those security layers by prior legislation has weakened that system, and in some ways encouraged the abuse of the electoral process. The justification stated is to make voting easier. Easy voting with no faith in the outcome is a dangerous proposition. While easy voting may improve one side's voter turnout, it'll be a hollow victory if there's no government to lead. It may result in a group of people who will no longer accept the decisions of the elected body, leading to an end of our form of government. That peaceful transfer of power, which has enabled the longest Republican form of government in history, is founded on faith in our electoral process. In closing, I'd like to acknowledge my fellow board members and the clerk of the board. I believe as a board that we maintained a pragmatic perspective that was focused on running an effective election. We had a few differences, but we worked through them in a very civil manner. I think we got a lot done. I think we worked very well together. I especially want to thank Kate for all of her work as the secretary, but also for her help after my accident that enabled me to continue to serve on the board. And that included hospital visits and something she really enjoyed, which was pushing me around the government.
In a wheelchair.
And I look forward to hearing more of the RV adventures of Bettina and Benson at our VFW events. And the worst kept secret of the board is that we all really work for Beth. As the longtime clerk of the board, Beth has the corporate knowledge to keep everything running smoothly. And in the Navy, and I'm pretty sure they still do this, they communicate ship to ship with flags, because it's hard to intercept that unless you're close enough to see the flags. And so they don't have to use radios or anything else. They have flags that have certain meanings. And the meaning in the Navy of Bravo Zulu is a good job. I don't know what my problem is. And so I'd like to give this coin to Beth.
Come here, Beth. I'm not going to get into this transaction.
Which is a Bravo Zulu coin in recognition of the great job she's done for the 8 years that I've been on the board and before that. So I'd like to thank all of you who helped me serve the voters of Fairfax County. And I'll assure you I will miss you all as I get to sleep in on election day. Sit back.
This is not a weapon. You know, Steve was already here. You were already here when I got here. And you've been the chair the whole time I've been on the electoral board, so I think it's a very collegial operative place that gets along, and I've appreciated your style, particularly since we've had several interesting years. And you have had lots of challenges, particularly in the public arena, but your knowledge of voting machines and voting systems and all your technical knowledge, including those new poll pads, you should have seen us lobbying for those poll pads. In the effort to upgrade and modernize our voting system has been incredible, and we on the electoral board and all the citizens of Fairfax County really appreciate that, even if they don't know it. And you have always focused on security and kept our attention to that. One time when I was chairing a task force on voting, I had to read all the Rover's notes, and I want to tell you, this man has the tiniest handwriting I ever had to read, but they were accurate and informative after I rubbed my eyes and got through them. I don't remember whether it was 17 or 18 when you came to us on election day in a wheelchair, particularly in Patrick's wheelchair, 17. And the effort that you put forth to be here on election day and not have to have a stand-in and all those other kinds of things was truly incredible. And I don't know that the people of Fairfax County know the effort. I held my breath about half the day to be sure that you were breathing. But it was really incredible, and for that alone, you should be thanked. So I want you to remember us. Now, in my hands, apparently, it seems like it's a weapon, but it isn't. It's a gavel, and it plays one on TV because it hasn't been engraved yet. So I'm going to give it to you and then snatch it back before you go home. But it's an appreciation for all the efforts you've made, both as an electoral board and for the voters of Fairfax County. And I won't hit you with it. I'll present it at that end first. And thank you. Thank you.
So as the youngest,
oh please,
the most recent,
okay.
the most recent, and of course the youngest member of the electoral board, and as Steve mentioned, we are. He is in my VFW poster. I am in his, and his lovely wife is here. She's my junior vice president of the auxiliary. So we see each other outside of this a lot. But the one thing that I do remember about Steve, and it was in the early days because we were actually at a big meeting. One of the things that you find out when you get on this board is the amount of training and meetings you are expected to go to in the godforsaken parts of Virginia where you have no clue, and if it wasn't for GPS, I would still be driving wherever the heck it was I was. But I remember someone who purported to know what he was talking about come to this meeting to present this fabulous idea that he had, that he assumed everyone would be kissing the ring because he was so brilliant. You remember this. And I was listening thinking, I know I'm new, but this is nonsense. And afterwards, Steve had a little chat with this individual about how this is nonsense. This isn't going to work. And I was just like, thank God there is somebody who actually knows what's the matter with this proposal. You know, it was one of those things where something's wrong, but you can't quite say what it was. And Steve went up to him afterwards and had a conversation with it. And I thought, well, thank God, because it would have affected not just those of us here in Fairfax County, but everybody in the Commonwealth. And I think that it's essential that we have that kind of expertise on the board to be able to speak knowledgeably about particularly the security stuff and how elections are really run. And Steve was not kidding when he said we are so extraordinarily different from the rest of the electoral boards, and there is actually a county in Virginia that has 3 precincts in it. And in that same early meeting, we did this training, and this person talked about how every member of the electoral board, they took the poll books and the machines and they put them in their vehicles and they went to the polls. And I thought, oh my God, I need to get a bigger vehicle. How are we going to do all this? And then I found out there were only three precincts and 3 electoral board members. So it's a very, very different environment that we deal with up here, and it is much more complicated. And Steve has just been instrumental in understanding the complexities and the security aspects of this, and from all of his experience, not just on the electoral board, but as a roller, and out there in the field, really bringing a very practical approach to what we're doing to keep these elections running as smoothly as we possibly can. And we are just going to miss you terribly. And we fight clean, so it's all good. It's all good. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much for those kind words. Some of them were true.
Call me a liar.
I would never say that to your face.
Yeah.
New business.
I don't have any business.
Should we introduce our visitors?
We do have a future electoral board member in the room, is that what you're
Yes,
referring to?
that's what I was referring to.
Chris Hensel, Christopher Hensel is here observing and hopefully learning how not to run a meeting.
Hopefully not resigning before he actually takes
Yeah,
office.
that's right, that's right.
Did
Run.
you mention the
Run.
5?
Save
Oh, you
yourself.
still have a chance.
Did you mention the 5 a.m. tech stuff that you always did?
Yeah,
Oh.
I have not. We'll have coffee. I'll explain it to him then. Because these two aren't gonna be there.
Count on that.
Oh, I may fool you. I just won't go to bed the night before.
Let's start with in person. Any public comment?
I do have one question. Can you give us your best estimate, I know it's gonna be hard, of a time range when you think you're gonna know where the precincts are, how many precincts we've got? Are we talking February, April?
We
Well-
are on the end of the whip. And
We have to have it in place for the primary.
Understood.
And so we'll do of course, there's a lot to be done, and then it has to go to the Board of Supervisors,
Mhm.
so there's a lead time, I think is a little long to do that. But we'll start on it. I think the registrar agrees as soon as we get the final data, but that's, rumor says that all the redistricting will be finished by this week. You all may have better sources than I do. I'm not sure I believe the rumor, so I don't know, but as soon as that happens, it's not hard, but it's large and complicated.
Mhm.
It's like a giant puzzle that we have to put together, so.
This is not prepared in advance, but, you know, Kate said some really wonderful things about Steve, but the fact is, I don't think Steve could have done that without Kate. You guys, all three of you were just so awesome, you know, after that accident. I remember meeting Beth in parking lots at 5 in the morning, and Kate just did everything. I mean, seriously, everything. They'd be at a meeting and she would notice Steve would have to take a pill or something, and she'd actually undo his water thing for him, and you know, this group has just been really special to me.
We
And I
all
just wanted
spend
to
a lot
thank
of time
everybody.
together.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
do.
And for those who are wondering, that that would be my bride.
Anybody online?
I do have a question regarding the last 4 social security numbers, but I think I'm gonna wait till the next meeting. I don't wanna put a poll on thanking you for your time on the board, so I'm gonna table it for next time, thank you.
I had actually emailed a letter to the board today, and if it's permissible, I'd like to read it into the record for everybody's benefit.
Please do it.
I am Steve Knotts, Chair of the Fairfax GOP, and I put this letter together today. So as Chairman of the Fairfax Republican Committee, I wish to commend Stephen Hunt for his many years of service to Fairfax County. A veteran of the U.S. Navy, Stephen went on to serve as an at-large member of the Fairfax County School Board from 2004 to 2007, as a member and chairman of the Fairfax Electoral Board from 2013 to present. In addition, he served the voters of Fairfax County as an observer of the polls, as an election officer, and has offered himself as a candidate for additional public office. Stephen's dedication to free, fair, and transparent elections run in accordance with the rule of law has been nothing but short of stellar. He consistently applied an unbiased approach to the election process, and his example is one we can all look to for guidance in the future. I'm confident that Stephen is not quite finished with his public service to our county, and I wish him great success in all his future endeavors, whether private or public. Please join me in saying a heartfelt thank you to Stephen and his tremendous service to Fairfax County over the years. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We do not need a closed session.
Okay. Thank you. Folks online who would have public comment, like raise your hand or just jump in and start talking.
Nobody.
All right, sounds quiet.
Mr. Chairman, I move. We adjourn.
And I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned at 7:22.